Hi, everyone. Thank you.
I can't promote you to panelist by phone. You have to be where you are. But anyway, we couldn't see you either way.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
We're happy to have you on, so thank you for joining. So I think we should get started. This is a brief call, but it's long overdue. Every time we've tried to organize, I've spoken to most of you over the phone and 3 or 4 other people who are part of the task force about their feelings about how we return to Community Board 7 office, both at the full board level and at the committee level. What I wanted to do tonight was really listen to all of you, get your opinions. Every time we've tried to do this in recent, the last 2 months, there's been an Omicron variant, or there's been a holiday, or there's been something, and we, I think we have a general sense of that we have until March 15th, and I think that there will likely potentially be an extension of the remote possibilities after March 15th, from what I understand, and Max or somebody from the executive committee who's on this call may know better than I do about what the borough president's office has said. I was hoping to have the borough president's office on this call tonight, and they were unable to join. So in any event, what I wanted to do tonight, and I circulated an agenda that I think Max sent to everyone, was really
I didn't get an agenda.
Oh, let me see if I can pull it up.
Okay. I
Yep,
think
I've
it
got
went. Okay.
Oh, what? I have it.
He sent
But
an
we don't-
email around today, I think, to everyone, but
Yep, it's at 9:16 a.m. It arrived in
Yeah.
my inbox anyway. Barbara, I'm
yeah,
forwarding it to
Barbara,
you
you
now.
got it at 9:16.
Barbara, I just sent it to you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, since we don't have,
You had received it, Barbara, at 9:16 this morning. So
unfortunately, we don't have chat anymore, so I can't put the agenda in the chat.
yeah, we can share the screen if we need to, but really, like, the purpose of tonight was really to go through, like, thinking through what's going to happen after, starting in March and going forward. Hearing from Max when he joins, and we can table this till when he does join. Oh, Max, hey, thank you for joining tonight.
Okay. Yes,
Maybe
you,
just-
and thank you, Mark. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So for tonight, this is really thinking about, first of all, getting a brief status update. And many of you, I think, if not all of you, were at the steering committee meeting to hear about the status of the Community Board 7 office and where we are there with how it's going with people coming back into the CB7 office. But primarily tonight was wanted to present 2 proposals for discussion. One is on return to full board meetings. And the second part of the discussion was return to in-person committee meetings, and if and when and how we want to have a hybrid structure for either of those. So I have ideas and opinions, but as the person who's sort of trying to get everyone's collective thoughts, I'm going to try to not include my opinions too much tonight because I want to hear from all of you. And within both of those, there's the question within both the in-person and the committee meetings. A subset of that is the public attendance, both at full board meetings and committee meetings. So that's sort of the crux of the meeting tonight, is to get your inputs. Most of you, I think everyone on this call is either a committee chair or a former committee chair or helped run the board at some point. So I know you all have lots of expertise, and that's the primary reason I wanted to bring this task force together tonight for about 30 or 40 minutes. And then I think coming out of tonight, what I'd really like to do, and I've talked to Max about this, is ideally potentially on March 7th, Monday, March 7th, which is the week after our full board meeting, is to host a public conversation of some sort to solicit community input about how they feel about coming back to board meetings. We can then compile that information and ideally send it on so that by the time of the March steering committee, we can present something that hopefully could be a model for other boards across the borough, but certainly reflecting what we all think as a task force that would be recommended. So Does that seem okay? And hopefully everyone has the email so we can follow along with the agenda. Maybe first, Max, do you want to just take a minute or two to
Sure.
talk about the CB7 office and where things stand with that in terms of people coming back in and how it's being used?
Absolutely. You guys can hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so actually, we've been, ever since Steve made the comment at steering meeting last week or the week before, that the office is technically open to board members, we've had some people come in. Yesterday, Beverly was by actually giving me a hand with the budgets. And, you know, it seems well. Obviously, people aren't, you know, jumping in mass right now, but everyone that wants to is starting to stop by, and certainly the staff is comfortable with that. And some people come in and wear masks. Other people come in and don't. It's sort of, you know, your preference. And things seem to be working well now. We just haven't had a large group in there since steering committee, and that wasn't necessarily a large group. But things have been well, and the staff is ready and prepared. We're all ready and prepared.
And how would you say, Max, in terms of the layout of the room, what the capacity would be for a meeting in the office, either masked or unmasked, or, you know, assuming everyone would be wearing a mask in both the public, but also the board. I'm assuming the table is still, I saw the table is still set up and people could gather around, board members could gather around the desk, the main tables.
Right.
How are you feeling about sort of the ventilation and other things? Do you feel like it's safe to bring people back more than board members, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think it would depend on how many board members come in. I think it would depend on how comfortable some people are. Right now, the chairs that aren't around the table sort of are maybe a little too close together to each other for maybe some people's comfort, but I think that could obviously be remedied by just removing some chairs and spacing them out, and there would still be capacity for the general public. I think some committee meetings could actually function pretty well right now that way, as long as you know, we still had the hybrid option for folks that wanted to zoom in or weren't quite yet comfortable enough.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
If I could answer your question with a question that Max might be able to help with. And the preface is that last summer, when we were in Dutch with the open meetings law and couldn't meet virtually anymore, several of us started calling around to our usual suspects of locations to try to find out if they would welcome us back to an in-person meeting. And the universal answer, to the extent there was an answer at all, was no. Sometimes the answer was they didn't even bother answering, which was a sort of a rude but convincing way to answer the question. So I'm wondering, Max or Elizabeth or anybody, has anybody talked to Goddard Riverside or Rodef Shalom or Fordham or whatever to gauge their sense of humor about all this?
I can answer, but Max, do you want to go first from the board perspective, and I can give you my perspective from my research?
Sure. Yeah, that sounds good. So we just got the green light to go ahead and reach out to them. We just haven't heard back in full yet, and I'm not sure if we've reached out to all of them. But I will say we've reached out to Kay's Church, and Kay's Church was fully prepared to have us in person. I was there. I met with Steve there, Kay, and their director of operations or director of activities, Brent. And I went over there 2 weeks ago as if we were preparing to have our March full board meeting in there. And obviously we're not doing that now this month, but Brent said that we're welcome to the space anytime that we want, as long as it doesn't conflict with, you know, something they've had that's previously scheduled.
Okay.
So, and I've done research both, you know, I think one of the things, even when I was chair, that I really tried to do was not just look at the usual suspects of where we do meetings all the time, but actually think about new spaces. Lincoln Center is open. They're open doing public events right now. They're open to hosting meetings. We just need to reach out to them. Museum of Natural History has been open for months, you know, with people who are vaccinated going into the museum. We've hosted meetings there before. I have not talked to Road of Shalom, and my understanding about Fordham was that, I think, Mark, to your point, they had said no a while back. But my understanding is also that I believe they are back on campus and the students are back and there are meetings going on in their auditorium that we often use. So part of the reason I wanted to do this call, it'll go into the second piece of this, which is really, I think you all as leaders of the board and former committee chairs and current committee chairs, we need to take a hard look at the reality is that people are going back to work, people are going back to the office, people are going back to synagogue and to cultural institutions. We are, my thought for this call was to think through a strategy where we come back to doing meetings safely in person without a hybrid option for board members, just because we've all taken the responsibility of knowing we were going to be doing a meeting once a month for 11 months of the year. And that was a responsibility we signed on to when we became board members. And then looking at how the public comes into our meetings. And then at the committee level, thinking through, because most of the committee meetings are held in a smaller space that, we have a lot of unknowns about, thinking through how a hybrid option would work at the committee level. That's one idea that's been thrown out. I mean, I guess maybe to start out with the full board meetings when it comes to board members, that's the first item I'd really like to get everyone around this Zoom room's thoughts on. And I will say that, again, I have my opinions. I want to hear yours. I'm obviously very conscious of people who have health issues, and we want to accommodate people who can't come to a meeting. But I do think my personal opinion is that there needs to be some level of return to a sense of normalcy where we have at least once a month our full board meeting in person when it is safe to do so. And by all health and other city agencies, I've done an exhaustive review of whether it's city planning or the MTA, their board meetings have been meeting in person every month. In person, their board members with a public hybrid option once a month for at least 5 or 6 months, even during Omicron. So that's my research. I'm opening it up for all of you to weigh in and let me know what you all think about it.
This is Irena. Can I share some thoughts?
100%, Irena. You're the first person to chime in, so please do.
Okay, so I agree, Elizabeth, that board members should be encouraged to attend committee and board meetings in person unless they're incapacitated. I also think that many of our neighbors are dividing their time in multiple residences now due to the pandemic. They're not all back. And one of the things that I've been talking about is the degree that we get more community people to attend committee meetings, public hearings, particularly as issues around dispensaries start to surface, getting our neighbors' thoughts on the restaurant sheds. There's just a lot of issues that are surfacing that will have implications for our neighbors, some of whom are dividing their time between multiple residences. We know this, even board members are doing it. And so I wonder whether we should consider hybrid, not so much for board members, but for the general public, as we try to increase participation among community residents as we move closer to lower transmission rates. And with that in mind, it will mean that as part of our criteria for where we hold board meetings, we will have to determine whether those facilities, new or the ones that we've used historically, have the ability to do hybrid. And what that looks like, as well as any issues around ventilation that people will be concerned about, and the ability to distance chairs if people opt for that. So I agree with you, Elizabeth, that I think when it comes to board members, we should incrementally get back to in-person meetings. I mean, I was onboarded during the pandemic. I haven't met anyone in person except for a few people. And it would be nice to sort of get back into the room together again. But I think we should consider a hybrid option for the public, because I think as we're trying to increase public participation in our board meetings, it would be nice to offer that option. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Serena. That's really good feedback. And again, I think even before the pandemic, we were really wrestling with how we could use technology. I mean, all of you know Rich Robbins, who is the biggest champion for getting our meetings live streamed, which we started, 5 or 6 years ago. And part of the reason we wanted to do that was to sort of democratize, have more people listen to things, but there was never an option to be interactive. And to have the Q&A sessions, the public sessions be something where people could, Zoom in for. And I'm completely open to that as a suggestion. And I think for a variety of reasons, it opens up the board a lot more. I think again, coming back to the original question, it's really what we want to ask of the 50 board members, the requirements for them for being in person, what recommendations do we want to make? And so Mark and then Barbara, I see both your hands up. So
I think Barbara was first.
Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
Thank you. Okay, well, first of all, we are volunteers, and I have a different feeling about this whole thing. First of all, I'd want to know, are we going to find out if people are vaccinated before they come into the room? I've had 3 vaccinations. If we can't do that, I am going to be very reluctant to come into the board office. I don't believe that the ventilation has been substantially changed in any way. We have one tiny window. So what are we talking about here? I don't care if they put in a major air conditioning system. I don't believe that it could possibly have been
Barbara,
made.
can I just say, we're talking about full board meetings now. We're not talking about the board.
Are people going to be required to wear masks in the room? Look, I have a compromised immune system. I have made a commitment to coming into the board office for my next Parks meeting because my co-chair is not going to be in town. But I don't feel comfortable unless the space is really, we're socially distanced and the space is really adequate.
Look, Barbara, I think we're all in agreement that the committee meetings are a different story, and until we figure out the situation in the board office, it's slightly different. What I think I wanted to start this conversation with was when we think about our monthly full board meetings, once a month. You have said that we are all volunteers. So are the MTA board members. So are the members of the City Planning Commission. Many of them are, have.
The MTA members are not volunteers. Andrew is the only volunteer.
MTA board members are not paid to be on the board.
They're not?
And I am happy to take that offline to discuss, but they are not paid.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. Okay.
So, and they go diligently, they go a lot farther than we do across our neighborhood. They go across town and downtown.
I'm only telling you from my personal point of view.
It's fine. My point is just, I think I'd love to hear from Mark and anyone else about sort of, let's limit this right now to the full board meetings. And the question of do we think that there is an opportunity for us to come back to a full board meeting, let's say in April? It's not going to happen in March, but let's say April or May when it's spring again. And then let's talk about, maybe the public. I think we can probably all agree that having a hybrid option for at least the public meetings would make sense for the community to be able to be a part of that. And Mark, you would know this better than anyone because you've handled a lot of the logistical issues with Zoom over the last 2 years in your role as both chair and otherwise, but I'll turn it over to you because I know you have a lot of thoughts on this.
I do, and I'm glad Barbara said what she said because I don't think she's the only person on our board who will have some version of that approach or that concern. So to make this meeting faster and easier, I think that a lot of this will be driven by what actually happens in the state legislature with respect to the open meetings law. Because if, as Stephen was predicting, that at some point their sense of humor about hybrid meetings goes away, then board members will be confronted with, so then the conversation will be about whether or not someone's comfortable being present in the room when the only option to be present would be to be physically in the same space as everybody else. Under the open meetings law as previously constituted, that's the only way you are quote unquote present and therefore eligible to vote and eligible to do whatever it is. And now, of course, if we were hybrid and let's say, I'm going to pick on Barbara because she raised her hand for it. Barbara's not comfortable coming into the room. Open meeting law goes back to what it used to be. Barbara can still Zoom in hybrid. She can still participate in the discussion, but she can't vote. And her presence doesn't count for a quorum. So that's the problem to be solved. That's the first problem to be solved. And then we go back to the steering meeting we had. We had a full board meeting on July 1st, inches or minutes before the open meeting law extension evaporated for a little while. And there were folks who were very much of the view, folks, our colleagues back then, life is different now, who were saying, in effect, I shouldn't be disenfranchised because I don't want to get in a room with you and not be able to vote. And while 9 out of 10 of our resolutions passed 38-0, I don't know where the other 12 people are, there's always 1 or 2 that passes 26-24. And disenfranchising somebody could tip a balance one way or the other. I think long-term, I agree with you, Elizabeth, that there needs to be a progress toward being in, all being back in the same room. What room that is, now Case Church apparently is big, actually not apparently, I've been in the space. It's big enough that we could all be as socially distant as we are at Fairway, or better, and still occupy that space. One of the interesting questions, and if Max is still on, maybe he could look into this for us, or maybe I should be the one to look into it. I know for a fact that government offices can't ask you whether you're vaccinated because we can't, because of HIPAA. We're not allowed to ask any medical questions. Can't ask you if you had the flu shot either, the regular one. But venues can.
Yes.
That's how restaurants are under an edict to do it. So one interesting thing to ask is whether a government meeting in a volunteer space, like all the ones that we use, whether not us, but K or Road of Shalom or Goddard Riverside, whether they
the
can
museum,
insist.
yeah.
Whether they can insist, because the museum, I think, does have a vaccination requirement for its visitors to the, the planetarium or whatever. I guess the planetarium is an open, whatever, you know what I mean. So one interesting question would be, and I think that's probably actually a question for the borough president's legal staff, because that's the resource we've been relying on. So we might as well keep going back to the same one and get consistent advice. But that's an interesting question. And I don't know if that would make Barbara or others that have that concern a little more comfortable. Especially if we tell the public that you're not excluded, you can still watch on YouTube, you can still, and possibly on Zoom if that capacity exists, so that they can not only watch but speak. So I think in terms of the hard work of this, I think we wait to see what the open meetings law tells us, because forcing folks back into a room before the law forces them back into a room makes us the heavy, makes us the unreasonable party, when in fact it's going to be taken out of our hands any minute now anyway. And I agree with, I think everyone, it's so heated agreement that with respect to the public, I think I would go further to say that the public will now demand that which we've been trying to accomplish before and been doing which is a hybrid meeting under Zoom or some other form. It is now the new normal. If we don't continue what we've been doing in some fashion, then we will be rightly held in contempt of the public input that we're trying to curry and increase. I'll stop there because I hope that's enough to chew on for a moment. But those are the best direct answers I can give you.
Thanks, Mark.
Can I just say,
Sure.
just a point of clarification, I don't believe museums are requiring vaccinations yet. They are requiring that patrons wear masks, but and I must also add, and I think you all know because you've been following the press, is that the mayor is increasingly lowering protocols, and probably by next week, we will not have to wear masks to enter a restaurant, and other indoor spaces. So I think, Mark, to your point, we may be jumping the gun a bit, and we may have to wait to see what both the mayor institutes in public buildings and other venues, as well as the state. Sorry if I spoke before someone else.
Yeah, thanks. While you were speaking, I checked the museum, and you're correct that you have to be vaccinated in order to get into the museum. It's right on their homepage. And while the mayor is talking about the mask requirement being relaxed for restaurants, I'm not hearing him relaxing the vaccination requirement. So that's
Okay,
there's no mask.
Certainly you need a mask when you go into any theater in New York City now.
and vaccination. I had to show vaccination.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, and you have to
Correct.
be vaccinated in theaters. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, thank you for clarifying the museum. I thought it was just a mask requirement. Thank you, Mark.
So
Yeah,
can I
and
jump in real
thanks,
quick?
Serena,
Matt?
and thanks, Mark. Doug, I see your hand up, so definitely weigh in, and then I'll add a couple comments.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to clarify my understanding I think we're talking about the vaccine requirement in restaurants, because nobody's required to wear a mask in a restaurant you're eating. There may be some policy to wear a mask when you're going in and out, but it's hardly enforced. I think the discussion was whether vaccine requirement is going to continue for restaurants.
Got it.
I mean,
Thanks. Did you have any other comments, or did you want to win?
Well, I'm not on the task force. I'm happy to be here and listen to it. So I'm mostly here to listen, but a lot, I'm taking it all in, and I do share the concerns that I've heard that Barbara mentioned and Mark, and I also understand the aspiration of eventually getting back to, in-person meetings, but certainly don't want to disenfranchise anyone Mark made the point so much more clear than I can, which is that, if someone doesn't get to vote because of their own concern for their public health, that's not fair to the board. That's, the way that, whether we like it or not, the way we've all been appointed is supposed to be ideally a fair and balanced. And then we lose the balance because if we have certain members that can't vote, then we have an imbalance. And of course, the issue of quorum. The one thing I could say is that I am concerned about capacity limit. So I think that we probably have jurisdiction, whatever venue we choose, whether it's Road of Shalom or, wherever. I think that we could probably, with the guidance of experts, figure out a safe capacity. And we've had that in the past where we had very, important or very populated committee. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing in the background. We've had, very controversial committee meetings, and we had a lot of people that showed up, and we had to have a wait. People had to wait until the room was full, then people would leave and come in. I think we have to set capacity, unless it's such a huge
For the public.
for the public. Yes.
Yeah.
That's just something I think.
I don't think any of us disagree with that, and I think there are ways we can. I think one thing we can come out of this meeting tonight with, unless Clara, you've been silent so far, and I want to hear your thoughts, is that the public, there needs to be a hybrid option, and we need to provide potentially limits on how many people can show up at a given meeting. Again, I want to go back to sort of how we think about the 50 members of the board. Some ideas that have been proposed, there are locations that can be outdoors for the next 2 or 3 months at least. There are locations, as we've discovered, that require vaccinations to enter, such as the museums. There are places where we can hold on a month-by-month basis our full board meetings in person. The reason why, again, I'm bringing this up is that I do think that we are a volunteer board, but we're also one where we have 100 people applying for probably 3 or 4 open slots this year, right? and people who want to get involved in their community and want to do things. What we don't want is to just turn into an organization that's doing everything virtually and over the phone, where we're not interacting with each other. What I'm trying to say is, I think the spirit of community boards is try to bring people together. And virtual has helped solve part of that problem over the last couple of years. It's been a great resource for us. But, you know, I don't think, my personal opinion is that it's not a viable solution to have somebody who's just going to dial in and Zoom in every month. And I remember before the pandemic, that was like the biggest no-no ever. Oh, I'm stuck at work tonight, but I'd really like to dial into a meeting, you know, or I've got to stay home with the kids, or, you know, I'm on vacation, but I'd really like to make the full board meeting. We were told consistently that that wasn't an option. If you took the responsibility of joining a board once a month, at a minimum once a month for a full board meeting, you made that commitment to be somewhere in person, not from anywhere else, but from your, you know, again, this is a whole new normal. So I'm not trying to do anything more than to try to raise a lot of issues that come up, and how many of you are lawyers who are on this call and can speak more articulately than I can. But I sense the community, as much as they also want to have a Zoom option for themselves, they also want board members to be held to a standard where it's like, okay, you know, they need to show that they're there and they're showing up and they're talking to people and they're not Zooming in. If the science and the data shows that it's safe to go back into a public meeting once a month, if it's healthy, and maybe we give people exemptions a couple times a month for full board members more than we used to, so that if they're concerned about their health or whatever. That was one option that one of the task force members presented to me. Maybe we're a little bit more, I don't want to say lenient, but we're a little bit more open to that. But I think the big yes or no question from this task force, the first one is, do we want to offer a hybrid option every month going forward for board members for a full board meeting? And Mark, to your point, we may not know the answer to that given the open meetings law question that's about to be resolved, right? But I'd just be curious to hear what you all think about that, because, you know, we're a task force. We can come up with recommendations regardless of, you know, we could help guide what these guys are going to come out with in the legislature over the next few weeks. So, Clara, you haven't spoken yet, and I wanted to, if you have thoughts, I wanted you to talk, and then Barbara, of course.
I guess, I mean, I certainly have thoughts, and I guess I'm here because Elizabeth, you asked me to be, so I am, because we're friends and because I want to be as helpful as I can. I think my answer to the specific question you asked is, from my point of view, both philosophically and agreeing with you on that, as well as practically, is no. Yeah, we don't offer a hybrid option unless a variety of circumstances that are largely beyond our control make us do so. And there is, as Mark was explaining in particular, there are things we don't know yet that may sort themselves out shortly. I think that if you've doing this volunteer work as a board member, you should come to a meeting, and if you are not triple vaccinated, that's your fault, and you ought to be able to be willing to wear a mask for the time you're in the meeting. I'll tell you guys that a day or two ago, it wasn't yesterday, I had an appointment with it happened to be a cardiologist, a doctor for me, who, knowing obviously full well that I'm in my 70s and have also a bit of an immune issue, said to me and to Richard, who was there as well, said, this, you know, almost everybody's going to get Omicron no matter what you do. Whether that's totally true, I don't know. We've avoided it by being very careful. He said, but you shouldn't be that worried about it. He said, the pandemic is not going away. Omicron's not going away. And if it does, there's going to be something else. He said, from his point of view, even at our age, et cetera, he said, go live your life. And I said, you mean we should go back to eating indoors in restaurants? He said, that's what I would advise you. And we said, well, we don't really care about movies, but we do care about the theater. He said, yeah, I mean, if I were you, and the theater is kind of like our full board meetings, he said, yeah, I would go do that, because even though your chances of getting Omicron, no matter what you do, are significant, the chances of getting really sick, much less dying, are really, really low if you've been triple vaccinated. So, I think you've got a personal responsibility to protect yourself in those ways. But if you are unwilling to come for whatever your own personal reasons are, including that if you have a second home and you're spending time there, and that's a lot of time there, and that's when our board meetings are, well, if you're spending that much time at your second home, then you're not living a life, you're not living the life that our community members are. And I'm troubled by the idea that somebody is pontificating and voting on issues that are less affluent neighbors are experiencing every day from their second home. So where I've always come out on this is get your body to a full board meeting, or if you miss enough of them, then somebody else could take your place. I don't buy into this disenfranchisement argument at all, actually. And very much I'm with Elizabeth on the idea of get your body into a full board meeting once a month. I'm amenable. I mean, I think there's something to be said for allowing more meetings to be missed before you are kicked off the board, which never happens anyway. But I'm largely in agreement with Elizabeth, I think, on the approach. And by the way, don't forget, as in the list of venues, don't forget Roosevelt Hospital, Mount Sinai West. I assume they can't require vaccinations to enter the building because, hey, they're a hospital. But they.
I think that was actually the last
They
full
do.
board meeting
They
we had
absolutely
before,
do.
I think it was the last full board meeting we had before we shut down completely. And I remember asking Dick Gottfried why he shut down COVID funding. It was the March 2020 full board meeting. I remember.
I actually missed that one because we were traveling.
But yeah, and we were all there unmasked, and the pandemic was probably raging by then. And
I will say one other thing, which is in my experience, and we've all got tons of experience now in various uses of Zoom or other formats. I think that the hybrid really sucks, and we should minimize our use of it to the extent that we can. It just makes it so much harder to get anything done, so much harder to concentrate. It's been great that we eliminated the chat. That was such a diversion, with everybody saying, oh, thanks for coming, Gail. So in general, I am for, as much as we can, minimizing with, and yeah, I mean, I do think whoever it was that said, maybe it was Mark, said, never mind who said it, you can't go home again. We're never going to be able to, maybe Doug, we're never going to be able to go back to where we were before, because there have been advantages, obvious advantages in community participation when you're online, and people are going to expect some version of that. But I don't think I think there may be a way to deal with it where people can listen in, they can whatever, but it's not as if, I don't think you have to run a hybrid meeting so that somebody who's not in the room has the same ability and mechanics to participate as somebody who is. Anyway, that's all for now.
No, thanks, Clary. That's super valuable. So Barbara and then Mark. Oh, Irina?
What?
Wait, Barbara is going to go first. Oh, do you have a reaction to Clary?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Clary, I wasn't referring to board members when I was talking about people who might be out of town. I'm trying to really emphasize the need to get more community residents involved in the community board meetings. I mean, I am stunned sometimes to be on full board meeting calls and really important issues surface, and when it's asked if there's anyone, waiting to speak, the answer is constantly no, because people haven't been informed. And it's a whole other issue, and I don't want to get this conversation get bogged down, but I just wanted to say to Clary, I wasn't referring to board members. I was referring to the general public.
I wasn't referring to what you said. I think that some other person tonight mentioned that some board members were not in New York City some of the time, but whether anybody else mentioned that or not, my comments stand. I wasn't referring to community members in that regard.
Barbara.
Thank you. Clary, I think your comments were a little bit insensitive towards me and to other board members who have issues and don't feel comfortable. I am a very responsible board member. Unlike many other people on the board, I do not turn my screen off and go have my dinner or do something else, listen to the meeting and then come back when I feel like voting. I stay on for the entire meeting, every single one, full board, and many other meetings that I attend, including my own 3 committees and the bylaws committee. So it's like 4 committees. I am very committed. I would not like to see my place replaced. I would not like to have somebody replace me because I felt personally compromised by going to a meeting. And it's upsetting to me. That attitude is upsetting to me. And I know that I'm not the only one on our board who has those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we need to be thinking through this and we need to be having more of a discussion about it. Barbara, I take your concerns, I deeply understand them. What I am trying to get back to, and I think that the board needs to get back to, is some way where, Arena, for instance, other new members of the board have never, they've never met you in person. They never had a chance to interact with you. They never had a chance to talk to you. Like, how can we get back to a sense of like spirit of the board? Because I don't think doing it over Zoom is the best way to build the community that Community Board 7 has always been about. And I worry about that for a variety of reasons. And I see, again, this is not personal for anyone. I think we're just trying to think about, again, I'm using the model of what other city agencies who have volunteers are doing and how we adhere to that in a way that is fair and responsible to the community. And
So can I jump in on that?
Yeah, and thank you, Mark. I mean, I think we can do that in a way that sort of combines the best of everything for Community Board 7 and present something that hopefully will make most people, if not 100% happy, at least mostly happy with the solution.
So I get where you're going with that, and in concept, I endorse it. Although I do have this concern. I know for a fact that that Barbara's not the only person who feels as she's espoused here. I just don't feel comfortable saying who else has shared that with me because it was kind of in confidence. So, okay. So, and I also take Clary's point that a need for a hybrid. So the original question you posed was, what about a hybrid meeting for board members going forward after, the state of emergency? And I completely agree with Clary that it shouldn't be because you're late at the office, and it shouldn't be because you're in your weekend house. It should only be because of something that is a bona fide issue. I would probably personally limit it to health issue, but I don't want to be, I haven't thought it all the way through. But here's my thought on that. If we're allowed to have a hybrid option going forward, and I'm not certain that that's going to be in the cards under the open meetings law, but let's assume it is. If there were a hybrid option, it should be at the chair's discretion in the way that there used to be such a thing as an excused absence. It turns out there really wasn't an excused absence. You're either there or you're not. But I think, so if someone were to go to the chair and say, listen, that room, my health issues, I shouldn't be deprived of my ability to vote because of the consequences of that room. But it shouldn't be a default option. It ought to be subject to some kind of clearance.
An exception and not the rule.
Well, an exception, not the rule. So the way that the rule should be written is in those rare instances where there is a legitimate concern, and I don't want to limit the field, but perhaps by way of example, but not limitation, it could be X or Y or Z, and health would be the one that I could foresee right now. But you'd have to make your case to the chair, and the chair would have to agree. And I don't want to make it a committee thing. I don't want to make it a certain number per year. But But the goal would be to have most of us in the room. And I'm agreeing with whoever it was that said, you know, I mean, our resolutions tend to pass 38 or 40 to none or whatever, which means that consistently at every meeting, there are 10 people who ain't there. And that's a problem that I was unable to solve. You know, something to think about if we start down this path. Anyway, the chair's discretion is the additional fact that I'm throwing into the hopper for consideration, which could be sort of a bridge between an all-in rule and an all-hybrid rule. I hope that's useful.
It is very useful. As usual, Mark, you always have great suggestions from having been a board chair as well. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that is probably something we would all agree on. Clara, your hand is up still, so please respond and then we can move on. I want to
another little a little thought or little story. The other day I was walking in the West Side and somebody said, "Hi, Clara," and I sort of looked and said, "Hi, who are you?" It was Courtney. And I had never met Courtney. Apparently she had come to a couple of full board meetings, but before she was appointed. So she knew me because she'd seen me at full board meetings. I mean, maybe she would recognize me from Zoom as well, but I didn't recognize her. Anyway, we had a very nice little chat, the import of which from both of us was how much we really, really wanted to get back in the same room with our colleagues and how much we thought, notwithstanding the obvious advantages of bringing in the community more and at the worst days of the pandemic, it was our only choice, how much we thought our board and its operations and its collegiality and its efficiency was lost by having to be online and how much we really wanted to both to resume in person. End of that story.
Thank you, Clara, for mentioning that. And, you know, I think it sounds like what Mark is saying, which is sort of in very exceptional circumstances that people have very specific health-related reasons. I think we are at the chair's discretion. There's an opportunity to maybe grant an exception. It should be an exception and not the rule. And I 100% agree. I think for all of us on this call, most of us, there are a few people who are on the task force who have, I've talked to Courtney about this, newer members, we are losing their interest in the board because they haven't been able to talk to you guys who are veterans, who have, you know, they haven't seen you, they haven't had a chance to hear you in person, they haven't had a chance to meet up with you. Now, maybe they could schedule a coffee with you or meet up or whatever, but I do think that the board is in a place right now where if we're going to continue the vibrancy of being diverse in a lot of different ways, the hope is that, you know, we can come back in a responsible way, recognizing the people who have health concerns. Again, I'm speaking only about the full board meetings. The second piece of this, so this meeting is being recorded, so I have learned that I am terrible at taking notes in minutes during a meeting, but I have it recorded and I'm gonna go back and listen to this and report back to Stephen. You know, ultimately some of this is going to be his decision and his prerogative. I think we've come up with some good suggestions and ideas tonight. I think the second piece of this is really when it comes to, I think, Clara, as you mentioned, sort of the hybrid option. And, you know, to me, there are two issues there. I think it democratizes the board in a lot of ways, which is a good thing. It opens things up for more people to join our meetings. From a logistics standpoint, for the secretaries and for the board, I have no idea. I mean, I think it could be, there's going to have to be a plan for how that works, because it is not easy to be handling both in person. I mean, we haven't done it yet, but handling in person plus stuff that's coming in over Zoom. And Max, you've done a great job, and Steve at the last steering committee meeting, sort of testing it out with steering, where you had people dialing in, but also a few people in the office. I think about 10 times that, you know, how that's going to work. And so I think we're all generally in support of hybrid, Clara, your good points notwithstanding. But then it becomes a question of like, how does a given community board like make that something that can actually be done effectively at a full board meeting and at a community board, at a committee meeting?
Elizabeth, I
So-
have a question for you, and whoever knows the answer to this, Max or Elizabeth or Mark. Kay's generosity is with this church is magnificent. And indeed, I recall that when we thought we had to meet again in person in July, whenever it was, that's where we were going to be. But to what extent do you know whether they might even be amenable to having committee meetings there? Because I think there are some pretty, legitimate concerns about the size and the ventilation in our office, certainly the size. And that church has the advantage of being right in the middle of our district. It's so close to our offices that geographically it's probably a good location. So I think we ought to be exploring at least options of having, if they are in person, having committee meetings not in our office, but for instance, in that church.
Max, I don't know if you have a response to that. My one reaction would be, I agree. But I also don't know if there is an option to do, like, I don't know what the technology capabilities are in these different locations to do a hybrid option. And if that just makes it like overcomplicated versus all the work that Max has done for the board office to do, committee meetings at CB7 with the public, maybe we say 10 people from the public, you sign in, you can come in, but we have a capacity of 20 people in this office tonight. Anyone else, you can Zoom in. I don't know, Max, if you're still on, please weigh in because you know more about this than I do.
Sure. You guys can still hear me, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. For those that weren't aware, my girlfriend and I are driving back from the city. She was nice enough to come in today, so we could finally look at apartments together. So that's why I'm calling in. Anyway, so when Stephen and I went to Kay's church, we went over with them, and actually that church is pretty well wired to work with all of our equipment, so we could effectively hold a hybrid meeting there. It would require a lot of extra labor to do so. It would be easy to at least stream it from there. That would be no problem. But to have people Zoom in from there, from somewhere else and participate was going to be a little bit more difficult, but it wasn't going to be insurmountable. And that was something that I was going to work with Brent at the church to get done. And I think technically that actually is the plan for the April meeting.
Okay. So the April meeting was going to be hybrid, the full board meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Understood. So, I mean, I guess, Barbara, since you're the one person I know you've had very good points on this tonight. You run a committee. Do you feel like your committees should continue to be virtual sort of in perpetuity, or like, how would you suggest, when would you feel most comfortable as a committee chair coming into a public space indoors to run a meeting?
I would personally like to know that people are vaccinated, for one thing. And I know that there's at least one other person on my committee. It's a relatively small committee who has a compromised system and has said that he's not coming to meetings. Whether that actually is true, I'm not sure. I've not had a conversation, but he's expressed it publicly many times. So you probably know who I'm talking about. But
I think it's a relative, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. Like I said, I will definitely go to my if we have to be in person on my meetings on March 21st, I will be there. I made that commitment to Natasha. But moving forward with transportation and bylaws and everything else, steering, and I'm right now, my health is the most important thing to me.
Of course, yeah. Trust
Yeah.
me, I know that. Doug, your hand is up and then we can close out. I know I said we wouldn't be more than an hour tonight. I really appreciate everyone taking
Just
time out.
about,
Yeah, and I have to go actually at the moment.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Barbara. This is really important to have your feedback. So thank you for joining tonight.
I'm glad to be participating in this discussion. Again, I'm not a task force member, but obviously I'm very involved. And I've been, giving this some thought and taking notes as we're speaking. Obviously, and this is my motto, this is not unique to me. Safety is always first, right? It has to be. There's nothing more important. So I assume that everything here is predicated on the numbers, where they are and continuing to trend where they're going. I got an alert today that there's an Omicron variant of concern that CDC is watching. God willing, that's nothing that's going to happen, but who knows, right? So that's the assumption. The question I have, and I don't know the answer to this, being a quasi city agency, well, the board itself, I guess, is a city agency, but being are we allowed to implement our own rules that may conflict with, like, for example, Governor Hochul has taken away the mask mandate for businesses, right? So Fairway, for example, if they choose, can enforce masks, but apparently they're not doing that. So people can walk into Fairway with or without a mask. That makes me very uncomfortable.
is that true, Doug? Last I saw, they had a sign a couple days ago. They were
Well,
signs.
they may have maybe preferred, but as a matter of fact, businesses
Maybe that's what it says.
businesses can make their own decision. There's no longer a mandate. And there's a lot of problems with that because some businesses say, hey, I used to rely on the mandate because I could point to the sign and they wouldn't use me as a target. Now it's the business owner. I'm enforcing it. Well, I hate you. You're infringing upon my rights. So the question is, can we as a board implement, let's say, for example, we say all guests of the full board have to, and board members must wear a mask during the entire meeting. Can we say that? Then I assume we're going to have those people that are going to come and say, this is not legal, this is not fair, I'm not wearing a mask, I don't care. I know we can't ask about the vaccination status, and maybe the whole problem is solved by the venue. If we're allowed to have a public meeting in a place that has different rules, I just don't know what the legality is if that's a violation. We can't have a meeting in a place that doesn't have ADA access. That I know is not appropriate.
Well, that's independent of this conversation tonight. I mean, that we've
Well,
been talking about for years.
Well, right. But I'm just saying, like, this has to do with my comfort level. I think the members of the public comfort level and the board members, right? How comfortable I'm going to feel as a board member showing up. What is the venue? What is the air circulation? What is the physical spacing? We know we can't ask about vaccination status unless the venue can, if that's legal. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to be these are the things that I'm ruminating over and as I listen to the meeting. So
I think one of the things that we're trying to do with this task force is to present a set of, if not recommendations, at least things that we've thought through. And I know you were asking like what the government is going to come back with, what, our city agency, what, the state legislature, whatever they're going to come back with. I think they're going to look to us. Like, I don't think they have any clue about this stuff. I don't think they're talking about it. I don't think they're thinking about it. I think they need sort of anecdotal evidence from task forces like this to be able to provide some, here's what we're thinking about, so that they can think it through. Because I think otherwise it's just going to be another month where it's like, okay, here we go. We're opening or we're not opening. And what I would really like us to do, and why I want to move towards as a closing to this call, is doing some sort of public meeting or another meeting of a bigger group of board members, potentially on March 7th, to just talk about these issues more and have a real agenda and think through, like, what can we present to these city and state leaders so that they are taking Barbara's considerations in hand. They are taking Clary's considerations in hand. All the things we've been talking about tonight. I don't know if other community boards are doing this. To my knowledge, Max, you might know better than me, but I think even for Mark Levine, like he probably he's been focused on a lot of different things over the last couple of months. And this is an area where I think our board could really provide some concrete solutions. I mean, Arena, you helped run the board, a number of years ago, so you know this world very well. So that to me is why I'd really like to come up with, even if it's just like a 1-page document of like, here, we met a couple times, we talked about these issues. Here are things that, when you're thinking about community boards that we care about, I do think that I don't think they're going to get around the fact that we are a public agency, a volunteer group. We are a city agency, right? So and Mark and other lawyers here can correct me if I'm wrong, but we do have to adhere to certain responsibilities that are the same as other city agencies when they hold public meetings. And, I don't think there's any way around that. And whether you're concerned about your health or not, it's like, can make recommendations, but I think ultimately if we're going to remain on a volunteer basis on the board of a city agency, we have to follow those rules. So, but I think I don't know what I think they're still working on the rules. And like somebody said at the beginning of this conversation, we're all in this new normal where we don't really know what people are thinking. And I think it's a really good opportunity for us as a board, not just to think about like the negative of COVID, but like how coming out of the pandemic, we can actually open up the board to more people. And whether that's through Zoom in a hybrid model for something, or whether it's for, doing more outreach when we do come back to in person, those are all things that I think are really important for us to try to document on a series of calls like now and hopefully on the 7th, and then present them to whomever. And I don't know who the right person is, Max, Mark, others. I think my thought was to send it, to Mark, who I've been talking to about this a little bit, but I do think it would be welcome. And I can't guarantee what the outcome is going to be for all of us and how we go to these meetings, but everything that each of you have said tonight is really important and something that I think should be documented and stuff that we should move forward. So,
Elizabeth, please remind me, what is the March 7th?
What I would like to do is have a public meeting. Like the task force was always planned to have a series of, I've talked individually to other members of the task force, all of you tonight. We always wanted to do some sort of meeting with the public to sort of hear what the public wants. I mean, we're here to serve the public, right? So I would like to hear, as much as I value everyone on this call and myself and my opinions, I also would like to hear what people, from the public want. And I don't want to assume anything, but, I think they'll have some interesting thoughts about how they feel safe coming back and how they feel like over the last 2 years, what they've learned from doing Zoom meetings. I think some of them probably loved being able to just like type in at 7:00 at night and listen to our full board meetings. I think other people probably wish they could have been there in person and found the chat and other things distracting. Like I would love to hear, I think the idea would be to have the public at least offer the opportunity for an hour on the 7th to hear from anyone who wants to, what they think, so that we can't say it was just something that we handed down as Community Board 7 or we only talked as a board. And I know this meeting tonight was open to the public, but I don't think we, it was more of a task force meeting more than a sort of advertised public conversation. And the thought, if you guys agree with that, if you don't agree with it, I'm happy to shelve it. My thought was, because we have full board on the 1st, Stephen could announce it at the full board meeting, and then it would give at least, people notice that we were having a conversation on the 7th and before the decisions were being handed down. If I understand correctly, the decision about the new rules won't be handed down until March 15th, if I understand that correctly.
That was my question.
It'll take effect March 15th. When they choose to hand it down is anybody's guess, but it being state government and it being the budget season, March 14th is probably the over-under.
Oh, okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That is very, very well said.
I have to go, everybody. So thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you,
Elizabeth, for
Barbara.
the
Thank you so
meeting.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you for
mean,
hearing
does
me.
that make sense for everyone? Like I mean,
It does. If I could just add a gloss to that, which is, I think you should solicit as many opinions as you possibly can from whatever audience you get. I would not, under any circumstances, conduct a survey.
Right.
Because when you conduct a survey, you end up with a number, and then you're wedded to that number. And if only the pros or only the cons show up to the meeting or to response to the survey, then you have this fact, which it may or may not be a fact. It's just what was the product of the result of who saw the outreach. And so I think you're in a position where you or whoever the group is needs to present that here are the options, here are the thoughts that we've received so far. Board, you should, and it's whether it's the steering committee or the executive committee, whoever it is that's going to have to be burdened with this decision. We're providing input, but not statistical certainty.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Mark, and well, I think Elizabeth, you're right that we should. But good night, Barbara, if you're leaving.
thanks, Barbara.
Yeah, I would say it even, I think a little more strongly or differently from Mark, which is, while I completely agree that it's we should hear what our community has to say. I mean, we represent our community. That's why we're here. I think that chances are very high if you have all these people who are in on a Zoom, because it will be a Zoom meeting, talking about, should we continue in a way where the public is able to continue to participate as fully as it has, even with all the problems, all these past months, or do something that is in some ways or another more restrictive to the public? You're going to get 100 members of the public who say, yeah, I want to be able to sit, to sit here and have my dinner and watch you. And you're going to get 0 members of the public who say, who want to be more limited. So I'd be very careful. And I think Mark's exactly right, that because I've said it before, but I think that while what has developed with Zoom and of necessity and aided by the technology that we fortunately have, has had a lot of upside in terms of the public participation and the participation of people who we represent, it's also just had enormous sort of negatives. I mean, our full board meetings go on to 11:30 most nights, for instance. And I think we have to be looking for something that doesn't keep all the bad, that keeps the good without keeping the bad of where we've been for the last few months. And I think purely ask the public sitting there at home, what do you think? You're not going to like the answers.
But
Right.
I don't,
I mean-
can I just say that I don't think consultation, gauging or measuring public sentiment ties us to whatever. It just, as a courtesy, it says to our neighbors, we value what you think on these issues. But you're right, Clary, at the end of the day, we've been appointed by public officials to represent them. So I don't think consultation forces us to implement everything that comes out of it. It's just gauging public sentiment, that's it. And then
I think the idea was it was going to be more of a public, just a public hearing, so that anyone who wanted to give their ideas about how it's worked, what's good, what's bad. The other thing, you guys got me thinking about surveys. And originally back in November, when I was starting to think about this with Stephen, we thought about doing an actual online survey, not during a meeting, but like something that could be on our website for a month or something, and people could weigh in. The problem was that public opinion, we agreed to do it, and then Omicron hit. So obviously people's opinions were going to shift, including my own, about in-person meetings like in December, right? So I don't know if now is the time to try to do something like that and say for a week, we want to have like a survey on the CV7 website. I think it's too late for that. I think, yeah. But I do think having an opportunity, and you guys tell me if you think March 7th is too short notice or not notice enough, but like, I feel like if we could get something out, put it in communications, have it mentioned at the full board meeting, people will have enough notice. It's not going to impact I mean, it may not impact any of this because we may not have any say at all, but hopefully we'll be able, we can factor that in and say, we held a public meeting, we listened to our neighbors and our constituents, and we factored that in to what we're sending you in this document, you know, sometime the week before March 15th.
Yeah, if you can finalize the date tomorrow, Max can get it onto Link NYC. And while Link NYC,
Oh yeah, that's great.
that hardly ever gets us a lot of an actual registration, but the number of people who view that and respond to it in other ways, it's as big as our own website.
That's a great idea.
There's an actual way to track that, and I've been tracking it, and it's our best mode other than our website.
I have loved seeing the committee meetings advertised, you know, on Link
Yes,
NYC. So thanks to everyone for doing
So
that.
that was Julian who got that started.
Amazing. Well, he's you know, we'll bring him back once he's graduated from college.
and before he's president of the United States.
Exactly. So look, I don't want to keep anyone too much longer. I know we said we'd only go an hour, but I really cannot thank you enough for your time. All 5 of you. Again, I've heard feedback from a few other folks who could not join tonight. I'm going to go listen to this transcript over the weekend so I can just make sure that I'm keeping my notes up. I think we'll move forward. I'll talk to Stephen, make sure that he announces something for March 7th. And Max, I'll connect with you offline on how we do that.
And I'm sorry, I just want to say two words that I didn't say before as it relates to coming back into person meetings. The 2 words are phase in. I'm thinking maybe not, you know, not jumping in, but maybe we phase it in over a period of 2 or 3 meetings. And
Sure.
that was just my thought, my parting thought. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Have a great evening, great weekend.
Be
See you
well.
later.
Thanks so much.